everyone. Thanks for joining us again for today's Wednesday Wellness with the Wichita Symphony. Today we have a really interesting theme that we're going to be talking about. And joining us, Caitlin Matson-Levy from Radio Kansas, our music therapist, Meg Beck, and composer and fellow Wichitan, Alex Wakim, who's zooming in from New York. So today's topic of helplessness and hopefulness, these are, in my opinion, some of the most powerful emotions that you can have. And there is kind of a fine line between those, and listening to music can help kind of push you into one direction, maybe one day, or pull you into a different direction a different day. And I was inspired by a piece of music that Caitlin and I were talking about over email a couple of months ago. And Caitlin, what this Barber second movement of the violin concerto does is just absolutely magical. Can you tell us why this piece works for you in any kind of emotional sense or any kind of supportive sense, or just talk about it?
Sure. Well, I've been a humongous fan of the second movement of Barber's violin concerto for a very long time. And it's a piece of music I find myself coming back to time and time again. And of course, as with all music, the emotion that I take from it, that it helps me feel on a deeper level, changes with time, changes due to my own life circumstances. But I have to say, it has been on repeat for me these past few months. And the Andante especially, which opens with this, just the most glorious oboe solo you've ever heard in your life. My father passed away in November. And I started listening to that Andante on repeat. And I found that it so perfectly described what I was feeling, which was, of course, the devastation of losing my father. I'm so sad to be without him. And there's a great ache and a great grief for him. But you know, grief is so multifaceted and multi-layered and different for everyone. And it wasn't enough for me to just say, I'm grieving the loss of my father, because there is so much more that came along with that. And kind of a corresponding emotion I felt was such deep gratitude for the love we had.
Wow.
And there's this Portuguese word called, is it saudade, which means kind of a nostalgic ache for something or someone you've lost. But what it also means, and this is probably the most important part, it's also the acknowledgement of the love that remains.
Wow.
And, you know, and the oboe is such a human instrument because it has the same range as a female mature voice. Like if you were to take my speaking voice and map it out on a treble clef, it would be an oboe part. And so in listening to it, I feel like it's quite literally the voice of my grief, but also just the acknowledgement of the beauty and the love that remains. And it has just become just an anchor for me, an emotional musical anchor over the past few months.
We're going to add a link to that onto this offering this week so people can go right to that second movement. I think that is so perfectly stated. And listening to how somebody enjoys a piece or uses a piece or feels a piece adds to my own enjoyment and meaning of the piece. And so Caitlin's sharing of that multifaceted feeling of that Barber will only add. And every time I play that piece, whether it's accompanimental or soloing or whatever, or listening to it, I think of everybody in my life who has experienced the piece and has shared a story. So that's just remarkable. For me, listening to that piece, I can feel all kinds of emotions, but I always sense this little, like almost like a flower trying to like come out of the ground. Like there is a little bit of hope. That last note is that first stem to me of that. So we'll continue talking about that, but I wanted to ask Meg, our music therapist, if she can kind of help explain using music and kind of reaching the hope from helplessness, or what Caitlin mentioned. How can one use that, Meg?
Well, I like that word anchor, Caitlin. I haven't ever used that word in relation to music. That sums up a lot. Um, for when I listen to the Barber piece, it has a lot of emotion in just a short piece of time. I wrote down it felt tender, and then to me it felt a little tension and anxiety, or agitation. It felt pain. It felt heavy, but then it got calm to me, so that alleviated those previous feelings. And then I felt like my energy expired, but then I accepted.
Mm.
And so that is how music can change different feelings, move us through. And at the first offering, we talked about the ISO principle, which you meet somebody where they're at emotionally, physically, and match the music, and then you change the music maybe to alleviate that feeling. Also, I want to say that our bodies do respond to our mind. So if we're listening to calm music and having calm thoughts, then that's going to affect us physically.
I like that music responding, or your body responding to music. I don't think people quite understand that that is such a physical, there's such an important relationship about that, the feeling, what you mentioned. I wanted to tie this together in a number of ways. I brought Alex in because early on in this kind of our wellness um, exploration and how music relates to our feelings and how it can benefit us physically and emotionally, I asked Alex just an innocent question, which turned out to be one of our offerings. If you could write music and it could be a weighted blanket, what would that sound like? What would a weighted blanket sound like? And Alex, his just creativity started like just gushing, and he came up with a few ideas, and he ended up writing about this theme we are talking about, what Caitlin articulated so well emotionally, and what Meg has mentioned supplementally with how we feel it physically. Alex, tell us about your work, which kind of starts out hopeless and kind of ends hopeful. And we're going to add at the very end of this video Alex's entire work. So we'll get to that. Alex.
Yes, totally. Thank you for having me. This is great. It's so fascinating to hear everybody's perspectives on these different pieces of music and on these different emotions. And so this whole idea of a weighted blanket, I don't know what in me prompted this thing of like warm, large, resonant, sort of cinematic sounds. That was the approach that I took in kind of a wispy melody. And so I started writing that, right? Day one, weighted blanket, something kind of hopeful. But then it was actually fascinating because it highlights this principle of different perspectives through the same piece of music. The day of the Capitol riots, I was like, I need to write something. And I think I needed to write this piece. That was like my thing to do that day. And so I was seeing that. And then there was, of course, this like wash of hopelessness that I think shaded the rest of the piece. So I started with more of this hopeful, like warm world. And then I started to add these shades of color based off of that different day of very different emotions. And then came back, a week later or so, and kind of refined the rest of it. And I used a lot of these open fifths in the melody, which are kind of known to be somewhat neutral. There's something to be filled in, and there's a little bit of mystery, especially with the ending. There's a big chord with a big bass note, but then slowly that bass note gets lifted, and that opens the door. Is there hope because that's lifted, or is that more helplessness or hopelessness? So I tried to keep it a bit ambiguous, but play within this world of creating sounds and cinematic sounds with Holly's amazing violin.
I like that you say ambiguous, because it does there is a fine line between those two emotions to me. And when I heard your piece for the first time, immediately I was struck, and I can't understand why, but I was struck and thought about the piece that Caitlin had brought up with a barber. And I think the thing that they're both completely different pieces, but the thing that is similar to my ears is that there is this kind of like leaning towards hopelessness or leaning towards hopefulness. And if you look at it one way, each piece, you can feel that hopelessness, or on a different day, you can look at it at a different angle and feel hopeful. And I think that's what's so just captivating about those two pieces. Caitlin, you look like you want to.
I do. Well, I was gonna say, Alex, I got to listen to your piece earlier on today. I got a sneak peek, a sneak listen, I suppose I should say. And hearing you describe what was happening when you were composing it, and it was like a light bulb went off, because it's a beautiful work, but there is some unrest. There's an unrest to it, but then so much beauty. And you think about the timeline of when you started it and what happened when you with the Capitol and coming back later, and also kind of the range of human emotions that all of us have gone through over the past couple of months dealing with everything. I can hear it, like it just a light bulb moment. It's beautiful, but there's something about it that Holly did this. That's exactly right. Whatever this is.
Yeah.
May I say something?
Yeah, please.
So I got a sneak listening to your piece too, Alex, and I really enjoyed it, like I have your other works. This started out for me like feeling like I was wandering and wondering, questioning, hesitant, feeling unsure, and then I wrote exhausting, but I didn't want to give up.
We're going to share also in the links some of Alex's recent album, which a lot of our Wichita Symphony colleagues recorded with you, I think, during the last several months. And I think it'll be interesting to compare and contrast, what Alex has written with those compared to this, which is so purposeful and intentful about just what we've been feeling, which sounds touchy-feely, but my goodness, we've been through a lot as a population here.
There's a lot to reflect on, and this one, it's interesting because the album was kind of the cinematic sort of journey, but it was this longer form sort of how do we explore everything in this longer form, whereas this piece was a lot more focused of like how do I explore.
This piece was really dense too. There was a lot in just 3 minutes.
Right.
Well, I think we're going to wrap this up, and I want to thank Caitlin, Meg, and Alex for joining. And right at the end of this video, you'll get to hear Alex's brand new, probably a world premiere at this point, because it's a world premiere on the YouTube network, of his piece called Hopelessness, but with a little bit of hopefulness at the end, and that'll be up to the listener to decide. So thanks for joining us this week, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week for another Wednesday Wellness. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
you.